Earth hung silently in the void, a fragile blue gem in the endless black. But it wasn't alone. Surrounding the planet was an alien fleet, sleek and vast, with shimmering ships that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. The Quorath, a proud and ancient race, had arrived. They came not with diplomacy but conquest, their superior technology rendering Earth's defenses little more than a quaint curiosity. On the bridge of the Quorath flagship, Commander Velkar observed Earth with a smirk. His voice, deep and resonant, carried an air of superiority as he addressed his crew. This species is a joke. Primitive tools, disorganized tactics, they barely qualify as sentient. Around him, laughter erupted, a chorus of arrogance echoing through the control room. The humans, they believed, were as predictable as the stones they once used to hunt. Their missiles, their defenses, all crude imitations of real weapons. Velkar leaned back in his chair, watching a feed of Earth's surface. A pity, he mused. I had hoped for a challenge. But while the aliens laughed, humanity was preparing. Beneath the surface of Earth, in a fortified underground command center, leaders and scientists huddled around flickering screens. There was no pretense of hope here, just determination. General Morrison, a grizzled veteran with gray streaks in his hair, addressed the room. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the weight of the moment. They're stronger, faster, smarter, he began, pacing as he spoke. But they don't understand us. They think we're predictable. That's their mistake. A young scientist, Dr. Patel, stepped forward, her expression both nervous and resolute. What we're about to do, it's unconventional. They won't see it coming, not because we're hiding it, but because they won't think it matters. On the screen behind her, a 3D model of Earth's asteroid belt spun slowly. General Morrison nodded. Let them laugh. They think they've already won. That's what we're counting on. The Quorath monitored every move from above, their advanced sensors picking up every missile being loaded, every launch being prepared. Velkar watched in amusement as Earth's forces scrambled like ants beneath a magnifying glass. Look at them, he said, gesturing at the screen. Desperate. As if their little toys could even scratch our hulls. His crew chuckled, one officer chiming in, they might as well be throwing rocks. Velkar grinned. Let them. It will make our victory all the sweeter. Back on Earth, the countdown had begun. Rows of missile silos opened, their payloads ready. General Morrison gave the order, his voice calm despite the stakes. Launch. The first wave of missiles roared skyward, leaving trails of fire in their wake. From above, the Quorath watched, bemused. Velkar raised an eyebrow. That's it. That's what they've mustered against us. He shook his head in mock pity. Pathetic. Humanity's aim seemed clear. The missiles arced predictably toward the Quorath flagship. Velkar leaned forward, his amusement replaced by a flicker of curiosity. What are you up to? He murmured, though he expected no answer. The Quorath fleet watched the missiles rise, their sleek forms cutting through the atmosphere with the precision of ancient human rockets. To the alien observers, they were almost nostalgic, a throwback to an era they had long surpassed. On the bridge of the flagship, Velkar allowed himself a chuckle, waving dismissively at the image displayed before him. Let them try, he said. This is their grand effort, their desperate last stand. It's almost endearing. The missiles approached in tight formation, their trajectories perfectly calculated. Quorath targeting systems locked on immediately, the flagship's shields shimmering faintly in preparation. One by one, the missiles were intercepted by precision lasers, erupting into harmless bursts of light. The display was more a technical formality than a defensive act, the crew carrying it out with the mechanical ease of routine. Velkar smirked, addressing his crew. And that, gentlemen, is how you handle an inferior species. They're predictable, unimaginative, and... A junior officer interrupted. Commander, another wave is incoming. Velkar rolled his eyes, gesturing toward the screen. Another futile attempt. Destroy them as well. The second wave fared no better than the first, exploding in brilliant flashes before even nearing the fleet. The Quorath were now openly mocking the effort, their laughter echoing through the ship. One officer leaned toward another. Do they really think this will work? It's almost insulting. Velkar grinned. They've thrown everything they have at us. I expected at least some creativity. On Earth, deep in the command center, there was no laughter, no celebration. The room was tense, filled with hushed whispers as screens tracked the aftermath. Dr. Patel's fingers flew across her keyboard, recalibrating calculations in real time. A nearby technician looked at her, concerned. They destroyed every missile. Not a single one made it. That's fine, Patel said, her voice sharper than expected. It wasn't about hitting them. General Morrison stood behind her, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the display. They're watching the wrong thing, he muttered. How long until Phase 2? 3 minutes, Patel replied. Once the final wave detonates, we'll know if it worked. The last volley of missiles launched from Earth, slower and more scattered than the previous waves. To the Quorath, they appeared desperate, uncoordinated evidence of humanity's collapse. Velkar laughed harder this time, shaking his head in disbelief. This is their final act. Firing in random directions. They've given up. Prepare the fleet for our next move. This planet has wasted enough of our time. As the final missiles were obliterated, Velkar turned his attention back to the Earth itself, already planning the next phase of their occupation. But the moment he looked away, a subtle tremor rippled through the ship. A lieutenant glanced at his monitor, frowning. Commander, the officer began cautiously, I'm detecting unusual movement near the asteroid belt. Velkar's brow furrowed, his amusement faltering for the first time. What do you mean, movement? From where? The officer hesitated. It's debris, Commander. Large, uncontrolled debris heading directly toward the fleet. The laughter ceased. The first impact was small, almost insignificant, as a piece of debris grazed one of the smaller Quorath ships. The crew dismissed it as space junk, the kind of anomaly that occasionally drifted through even their advanced defense fields. But then came another, larger piece, slamming into the flank of a cruiser, leaving a visible dent in its hull. Velkar's gaze snapped to the main display, his expression hardening. What is this? He demanded. How did we not account for this debris field? The lieutenant's voice wavered. Commander, it's not random. The debris is moving in a concentrated pattern directly toward the fleet. Another ship was struck, its shields flickering under the sudden barrage. Then another. And another. The meteor belt, once distant and irrelevant, had been transformed into a chaotic storm of high-velocity projectiles. Shards of rock and ice hurtled through space, moving with deadly precision toward the Quorath ships. It's not natural, one officer muttered, panic creeping into his voice. They did this. The humans did this. Velkar's jaw tightened as he barked orders. Activate full shield protocols. Redirect all power to defensive systems. Destroy the debris before it breaches the fleet. The Quorath ships lit up with defensive fire, lasers, and energy bursts attempting to intercept the incoming storm. For a moment, it seemed like they might regain control, the brilliance of their weaponry creating an artificial starfield around them. But for every piece of debris they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. On Earth, the tension broke into grim satisfaction as the command center watched the asteroid storm unfold. General Morrison leaned over Patel's workstation, his voice low but steady. You were right. Their systems aren't designed to handle this kind of attack. Patel nodded, her eyes never leaving the screen. Their shields are optimized for energy-based weapons, not kinetic impacts. They underestimated us. They thought we'd fight like them. The Quorath flagship shook violently as a particularly large fragment collided with its hull. Velkar gripped the edge of his console, his calm demeanor cracking under the weight of the chaos unfolding around him. The asteroid belt, once a harmless feature of this solar system, had become a weapon humanity had aimed with surgical precision. How did they do this? Velkar hissed. Another officer answered, his voice strained. The missiles, Commander. They weren't targeting us directly. They destabilized the asteroid belt, triggered a chain reaction. Velkar's eyes widened as realization dawned. They used their own planet's surroundings as a weapon. He trailed off, the words bitter in his mouth. Outside, the fleet was in disarray. Ships collided as they tried to maneuver out of the storm, their once perfect formation now a chaotic scramble for survival. Smaller vessels disintegrated on impact, while larger ones struggled to maintain power under the relentless bombardment. For the first time in his long career, Velkar felt something unfamiliar: doubt. The humans had turned their weakness into a strength, their primitive weapons into a distraction for a far greater threat. And now, the once invincible Quorath fleet was crumbling. The battered remains of the Quorath fleet limped away from Earth's orbit, their sleek ships now marred with gashes and scorch marks. What had started as an effortless display of dominance had turned into a desperate retreat. Velkar stood rigid on the bridge, his pride as fractured as the hulls of his ships. Around him, the crew worked in grim silence, their earlier laughter replaced by a heavy air of defeat. As the flagship struggled to maintain its course, Velkar stared at the planet shrinking on the display. They were nothing, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Primitive, disorganized. And yet, his voice trailed off, his thoughts a tangled mix of anger and reluctant respect. A communication officer turned hesitantly toward him. "Commander, shall I report this to the High Council?" Velkar's jaw tightened. He knew the repercussions of failure. The Quorath did not tolerate weakness, and explaining how a backwater species had outmaneuvered them would bring shame not just to him but to their entire fleet. Still, the truth was unavoidable. "Report it," he said finally, his voice like stone. "And tell them to reconsider underestimating the humans. They think in ways we cannot predict." Back on Earth, celebrations erupted in every city, from the largest metropolises to the smallest villages. People hugged strangers in the streets, wept with relief, and marveled at the unexpected triumph. But in the underground command center, the mood was more subdued. General Morrison watched the retreating fleet on the monitor, his face expressionless. Around him, his staff exchanged cautious smiles, though no one dared fully relax. Morrison turned to Patel, who was reviewing data from the asteroid belt. "Good work, Doctor," he said. "You gave us a fighting chance when no one else could." Patel exhaled slowly, finally allowing herself a small smile. "We got lucky," she admitted. "If they'd realized what we were doing even a few minutes earlier." "They didn't," Morrison interrupted. "And that's what matters. They looked down on us, and it cost them." The room fell silent as everyone processed the gravity of what had just happened. They had won, but only just. The cost of failure had been too high to contemplate, and the knowledge that the Quorath might return lingered in every corner of the room. Thousands of miles above, the asteroid belt slowly returned to its natural state, the chaos subsiding into calm. It was a silent monument to humanity's ingenuity and desperation. In a distant part of the galaxy, the Quorath High Council convened. Velkar's report was met with disbelief and anger, but also something deeper: unease. "They are dangerous," Velkar concluded. "Not because of their strength, but because of their unpredictability. Their minds do not follow the patterns we expect. If left unchecked, they could become a threat far greater than we anticipated." One counselor leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Then we must ensure they never have that chance." On Earth, General Morrison looked up at the screen one last time before turning away. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "But so will we."